The Strait of Hormuz, 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply flows through this ribbon of dark water. For the past 67 days, it has been a killing ground. On this night, the night of May 4th, 2026, it is about to become something far worse. At exactly 0347 hours local time, the USS Stout, an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 2A guided missile destroyer, cut silently through the black, heat-shimmering waters at the head of the first Project Freedom Escort convoy. Her SPY-1D phased array radar was already painting 247 distinct surface contacts across a 60-mile picture. Below her keel, the temperature inversion layer, a permanent feature of Persian Gulf water columns, was degrading her hull-mounted AN/SQ S53C sonar returns by nearly 40%. The watch officer in the Combat Information Center knew it. He had noted it in the log 20 minutes earlier and said nothing to the bridge. There was nothing to say. In the Strait of Hormuz in the spring of 2026, you fought with the physics you had. Behind the Stout, in a column formation stretching 7 nautical miles south, sailed 3 vessels: the Alliance Fairfax, a U.S. maritime security program-enrolled ro-ro cargo ship; the HMM Namu, a Panamanian-flagged container vessel operated by South Korean carrier HMM; and the Scandinavian-flagged tanker MV Nordic Crown, riding high, empty, desperate to reach the Gulf of Oman after 6 weeks of detention. These were not warships. They were civilian vessels crewed by Filipino, Indian, and Ukrainian seafarers who had agreed to trust the United States Navy with their lives. Above the formation, 2 MH-60R Seahawks from HSM-72 Proud Warriors flew opposing racetrack patterns at 500 feet, their APS-153-V multi-mode radar staring into the darkness for the small, fast, radar-absorbent shapes of IRGC Navy Bogomar and PACAP-3 fast attack craft. The IRGC had been watching them for 11 hours. 0349er local. 42 nautical miles to the north-northwest, nestled in the shallow coastal darkness off Bandar Abbas, 3 Iranian Sina-class frigates, the IRS Al-Vand, the IRS Al-Borz, and the IRS Sabalan had been sitting at anchor with their fire control radars in standby since midnight. Their crews were at general quarters. Their C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles, each carrying a 165-kilogram warhead capable of defeating the side armor of a destroyer, were on the rails, locked and warmed. But the frigates were a feint. The real threat, the threat that no radar in the convoy could see, was already inside the defensive perimeter. Beneath the surface, barely 4 kilometers off the Stout's port bow, an Iranian Navy Ghadir-class midget submarine, a 120-ton vessel nearly impossible to detect against the thermocline, had been lying motionless on the bottom for 6 hours. Its 2 DM-3B heavyweight torpedoes were flooded, outer doors closed, waiting. And on the surface, disguised as fishing dhows and scattered across a 10-mile arc to the south of the convoy's projected track, 19 IRGC PACAP-3 fast attack craft idled at 3 knots, their IAS transponders dark, their 107mm rockets and 23mm autocannons manned by Revolutionary Guards who had been rehearsing this exact scenario in the Bandar Abbas shallow water trading range since February. This was not a reaction force. This was an ambush 43 days in the making. What Iran understood, what their strategists had gamed out in simulation after simulation, was that the Strait of Hormuz is not a sea lane. It is a corridor. And in a corridor, the defender always has the initiative. The traitor came from a source no one expected. The South Korean vessel, HMM Namu, 4th in column, suddenly flashed a mayday on Channel 16. An explosion had detonated on her port bow. Not a missile, not a torpedo, a limpet mine, almost certainly attached during the vessel's weeks of forced anchorage in the UAE's outer roadstead, triggered remotely on a coded signal from an IRGC handler ashore. The blast tore a 3-meter hole in her hull below the waterline. She began to list immediately at 4 degrees to port. On the bridge of the Stout, the tactical picture changed in milliseconds. At the same time, Seahawk Flight 1 called a contact, then another. then 6 simultaneously. The fishing dhows were accelerating. All 19 contacts, now running at 32 knots and closing, came alive on the SH-60R's radar picture at the exact same moment, spaced in a crescent formation designed to overwhelm point defense by presenting simultaneous threat vectors from 4 compass sectors. This was not a spontaneous attack. Somewhere ashore, an IRGC commander had pressed a single button. Operation Project Freedom had sailed directly into the jaws of a trap. At 3:53 local, 60 seconds into the attack, Stout's commanding officer, Commander Alexis Varga, had been in the CIC since midnight. She did not wait for orders from Fifth Fleet. The rules of engagement for Project Freedom, classified TS-SCI and rehearsed in 47 separate pre-deployment scenarios, were unambiguous. Hostile act, hostile intent. She had both. "Weapons free, all sectors," she said. Her voice did not rise. It never did. The 2 MH-60R Seahawks dropped to 150 feet and opened up with their M197 20mm autocannons, each capable of firing 1,000 rounds per minute. The FLIR footage broadcast back to the CIC showed the lead PACAP-3 craft disintegrate in a white thermal flash, its fiberglass hull simply ceasing to exist at the point of impact, the crew thrown into the black water. The second fast attack boat took a burst through the engine compartment and continued coasting forward on inertia, already dead for another 40 meters before stopping. Simultaneously, the Stout's Mk-15 Phalanx CIWS, the 6-barreled 20mm Gatling system known to every sailor as the R2-D2, spun up to full speed and began tracking the fastest closing surface contacts at an autonomous engagement rate of 4,500 rounds per minute. Its radar eye was already solving the intercept geometry for 3 boats closing at 31 knots from bearing 275. But the Phalanx was built to kill missiles, not swarms. Its engagement envelope, optimized for defeating sea-skimming anti-ship weapons, was being pushed into a mode it was never designed to dominate: continuous, multi-target, simultaneous surface engagement at close range. Of the 7 boats entering its firing solution, it could confidently kill 4 before the others closed in within effective rocket range. The tactical math was unfavorable, and the Stout knew it. At 3:95 local, 3 minutes into the attack, 180 miles to the southeastern edge, aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78, operating in the Gulf of Oman at the edge of the exclusion zone, the strike group commander, Rear Admiral Dennis Faraday, was already looking at the Stout's Link 16 tactical picture on a 60-inch display. He had 8 FA-18E Super Hornets airborne on combat air patrol, armed with AGM-65 Mavericks and GBU-53/B Stormbreaker small-diameter bombs, precision weapons optimized for exactly this kind of dense, cluttered, civilian proximate engagement. They were 12 minutes away at military power. 12 minutes was an eternity. At the same time, the 3 Iris frigates to the north-northwest came alive on the network. Their bandstand fire control radars, the distinctive signature of a C-102 targeting sequence, illuminated the Stout on her electronic warfare suite's AN/SLQ-32 V6 Sea-Whip Block 3. A triple-tone alarm sounded in the CIC. The operator barely had time to call it before the Sea-Whip autonomously began saturating the threat radar frequencies with electronic jamming pulses, degrading the Iranian fire control solution. But it could not suppress all 3 frigates simultaneously. One was getting a clean look. And then came the moment the U.S. Navy had feared since the Strait closed 60 days ago. A Ghadir-class submarine opened its outer torpedo tube doors. The transient acoustic signature, a brief, machine-sharp metallic clunk propagating through the water column, was captured by the Stout's tow array and processed in 0.8 seconds by the AN/SQQ-89A/V15 combat sonar suite. A new track symbol appeared in the CIC display. The submarine was 4,000 meters off the port bow, close enough that it would not need a course correction after launch. The torpedo would reach the Stout in approximately 93 seconds after tube exit. In that moment, Commander Varga faced a tactical problem with no clean solution. A surface swarm attacking from the south, a frigate with missile lock to the north, and a torpedo likely already in the water beneath her keel. She was fighting in 3 domains at the same time. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be studied in every naval war college from Newport to Portsmouth for the next generation. Commander Varga made 3 decisions in rapid sequence, each of them technically correct, each of them buying time measured in seconds. First, she ordered a hard turn to port, directly toward the submarine contact, placing the Stout bows on to minimize her torpedo cross-section and forcing any launched weapon into the most demanding intercept geometry possible. Second, she launched 2 AN/SLQ-25 Nixie towed torpedo decoys from the stern to create a false acoustic signature. Third, she directed her single-embarked MH-60R, the one not already engaged with surface contacts, to race to the datum and prosecute the submarine with Mk-54 Mako lightweight torpedoes. At the same time, the Escort's full electronic warfare package went to maximum output. The Sea-Whip Block 3 system, networked via Link 16 to a U.S. Air Force EC-130H compass call aircraft operating at altitude 40 miles south, blanketed every known IRGC communications frequency in a wall of digital noise, severing the coordination link between the fast attack boat swarm and their shore-based command authority. 11 of the 19 PACOP boats immediately began maneuvering independently and erratically, their attack geometry collapsing. 4 others, evidently operating on pre-programmed attack profiles, continued accelerating. The Seahawks killed 2 of them in the next 60 seconds. A third detonated in a column of orange fire after its 107mm rocket ignited prematurely, almost certainly a manufacturing defect in ammunition stockpiled since before the war began. The fourth closed to within 800 meters of the Alliance Fairfax before the Phalanx finally destroyed it in a sustained 3-second burst that left nothing above the waterline. The Ghadir submarine, facing a direct MH-60 prosecution, did what its doctrine demanded. It launched both torpedoes and attempted to sprint for shallow water. The Nixie decoys did their job on one weapon. The first torpedo locked onto the acoustic signature and detonated 700 meters astern of the Stout in a geyser of white water visible from the bridge. The second torpedo ignored the decoy. It was running hot, straight, and normal on a bearing of 015, closing at 45 knots toward the Stout's repositioned bow. Commander Varga had 11 seconds. She ordered the helmsman to accelerate to flank speed 31 knots and execute a radical course change to unmask her AN/SQQ-89 sonar dome fully ahead of the torpedo's track, then broadcast the torpedo's precise bearing on Link 16 to the prosecuting Seahawk. The MH-60R crew, Lieutenant Commander James Park and his sensor operator, had the weapon on their dipping sonar at 740 meters. They dropped a single Mk-54 lightweight torpedo directly in front of it. The 2 weapons, one American, one Iranian, detected each other. The Mk-54's active sonar selected the larger, louder, hotter contact. The intercept detonation when it came at 0401 local registered as a magnitude 1.8 seismic event on monitoring stations in Muscat. The IRGC frigate Alvand, the one that had achieved a clean fire control solution despite the jamming, launched 2 C-802 anti-ship missiles in a 2-second ripple fire from bearing 310. Their radar seekers went active 8 seconds after launch at sea-skimming altitude, 47 feet above the wavetops, each missile accelerating through Mach 0.9 toward the Stout's radar cross-section. The Aegis combat system, running in auto special mode, had already solved the intercept. 2 RIM-162 ESSM missiles from the Mk-41 vertical launch system departed their cells with an ear-splitting crack, riding their semi-active radar guidance directly into the incoming weapons. Both C-802s were destroyed at 12 kilometers, their debris fields splashing into the strait far short of the convoy.
At the same moment, with the geometry of the surface engagement shifting decisively against Iran, the first pair of FA-18Es from the Ford arrived overhead at 22,000 feet. Their APG-79V4 AESA radars looked down through the cluttered strait and painted the three IRGC frigates in perfect resolution. The lead aircraft was not yet authorized to engage. Fifth Fleet's rules of engagement required a positive hostile act from the frigates before they could be struck. The Alvan's missile launch had satisfied that requirement for that ship alone. A single GBU-53B Stormbreaker, a 70-pound tri-mode seeker weapon capable of defeating a moving naval vessel in any weather, fell from 30,000 feet, guided by the Alvan's own radar emissions to within a meter of her bridge. The detonation was surgical. The bridge, the CIC, and the forward gun mount were destroyed. The hull remained afloat. The weapon was designed to stop a fight, not sink a ship. The Iris All-Bors and Iris Sabalan immediately went to emergency shutdown on their fire control radars. They were not fired upon. The message had been delivered. By 0408 hours, 11 minutes and 40 seconds after the limpet mine detonated on the HMM Namu's hull, the kinetic phase of the engagement was over. 6 IRGC PACAP-3 fast attack craft had been destroyed, 3 by Seahawk autocannons, 2 by Phalanx CIWS, 1 by its own malfunctioning munitions. 2 C-802 cruise missiles had been defeated by ESSM. A Gadir submarine was being prosecuted by the 2nd MH-60R crew, transmitting to its commander that continued hostile action would result in sinking. The submarine surfaced 3 minutes later and transmitted a distress call. The HMM Namu was taking on water but remained afloat. The U.S. Navy's damage control assessment team, fast-roped from a 3rd helicopter, confirmed the flooding could be controlled with portable pumping equipment. 17 sailors aboard the South Korean vessel had sustained injuries from the initial blast. 1, an engine room watchstander from the Philippines, did not survive the night. As dawn broke over the Strait of Hormuz on May 4, 2026, the Alliance Fairfax crossed the reporting line into the Gulf of Oman. It was the first commercial vessel to successfully transit the strait under U.S. military escort since the closure began 60 days earlier. In Washington, the White House declared it a success. In Tehran, the IRGC said nothing about the boats, nothing about the submarine, and nothing about the frigate. They had learned, as navies always do, what a decade of sanctions, degraded maintenance, and inferior production quality looks like when it meets a warship built to win at the point of maximum violence. By nightfall on May 6th, 2 days after the battle, President Trump had paused Project Freedom entirely, not because the U.S. Navy had failed, but because it had succeeded so completely that Tehran was no longer the only capital asking how many more rounds this corridor could absorb before something irreversible happened. The Strait of Hormuz has been contested for millennia. Empires have strangled rivals here since the Persians denied the Greeks free passage in 480 BC. What changed on May 4, 2026 was not the geography, it was the speed. 11 minutes. That is how long a modern integrated naval task group, Aegis, SEAWIP, Link 16, networked air, surface, and subsurface assets to dominate a multi-domain attack that a lesser force would not have survived. The IRGC had spent 43 days preparing a trap. The U.S. Navy dismantled it in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. But here is the question that no one in any capital wants to answer publicly. What happens the next time? Iran still controls the geography. They can still mine, they can still harass, they can still close, and every engagement that damages their surface fleet and degrades their coordination only pushes them toward the one escalatory option that no phalanx system and no ESSM salvo can intercept before it matters. The Strait of Hormuz did not become safer on May 4th. It became more dangerous. The lesson of this battle is not that the United States Navy is invincible. The lesson is that invincibility, demonstrated convincingly enough, does not end a war. It raises the stakes of the next move. You have just watched the most kinetically compressed 11 minutes in 21st century naval history. If you believe the world's strategists have drawn the right conclusions from it,
comment 1. If you believe this is only a rehearsal for something far larger, comment 2. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, the Strait of Hormuz does not care who controls the narrative. It only cares who controls the water.